There's super strict rules with water. Absolutely. It's one of the most contrary things you can draw. Like if you're a beginner in effects, do not start with water. You are just going to like really frustrate yourself. This one's called Abandoned Chart.
Uh-huh.
Because you drew it and you're like, okay, can I do a timing chart? And you drew this timing chart and I was like, oh my God, he's getting it. He's on the right path. And then you just completely abandoned it. So you drew this beautiful arc. This is, I was like, yes, the arc, I was so proud of you. And then you just like the splash doesn't actually go by the chart at all. Like, why'd you draw the chart? If you weren't going to use the chart, you abandoned it. If you're starting out in effects, the best thing you can do, like I said, is wavy line and flag. Fire is fun because it has a lot of forgiveness. Things like lightning has a lot of forgiveness, or even just doing swishy stuff, doing magic, like poofy dust poofs are really fun because even if they're really sloppy, you could just blur them a lot and you can usually save it.
Oh, right.
You can't blur water because this is touching the arc. This pointy bit is going to follow the arc. Here we go. It's following the arc. It's gone. So you have this pointy bit, and then there's no continuation of the pointy bit.
All right.
Special effects, the thing that I find most character animators struggle with is they see the forest and they can't see the tree.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much happening in a splash. They're just like, oh, it's chaos, but it really isn't. Every piece of the splash can be treated the way you treat anything else, right? It's just with a character, the character itself is propelling things. So the character's moving its arms. The character has some sort of thought process going on. But if you have a limp body that you throw down a hill, that's a lot more like special effect. So you heave the body off, and then what do the limbs do? They react to the physics of the things that are happening. So it bounces off the ground, and the limbs react to that. Gravity is causing force on things. So when you do a splash, you're thinking about the forces involved. And usually in simple cartoons, you have the impact and you have gravity, and that's all you have to think about.
Impact.
If you're putting it in a windy place, then you have the wind to think about.
Yep.
But I've got a really good exercise for you to help you with the trajectory of these arcs.
Yep.
Let me know if you've heard of it. It's called the bouncing ball.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I've heard of the bouncing ball.
Okay, so
it's like the hello world of animation exercise,
right? And people completely forget it exists when they do splashes, because each of these little things are just a ball thrown up in the air.
Remember the ball,
the ball. People underestimate how strong that exercise is. People bounce a ball and they're like, okay, what's next? It's like, no. You get that ball back. You do a basketball, you would do a ping pong ball, you would do a lead ball, you do a marble, you do it on the stairs, you do it on carpet. You could just do 100 balls and spend so much time practicing your timing and your arcs and your spacing, everything. It's a magical exercise. And it's good for special effects too. All right, so first thing you think about is what is falling into the water.
Yeah.
Because the shape of your splash is going to be determined by that. So if you have a rock that looks like this and it's hitting the water, let's say it's like this shape. So it's going to hit the water like this and spread things away from it in a very flat arc. But if you have something that's really pointy, it's going to do a much smaller splash, but it's going to be much more directed upwards. Okay?
Right.
So it's a little bit of logic behind it, but just playing with this stuff is you're going to start seeing it. If you throw something into the water this way, then it's going to send the water up and away far more in this direction and a little bit in this direction. So you're going to get one of these shaped like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where you get the higher side on this. So that's the first thing you think about. If you're just dropping a ball in there, it's a great little start. Then you're just going to get your kind of typical bowl splash. And then you can start with the bowls that you were drawing. It absolutely looks like a bowl. And then you can just pick a few high and low points just to make it a little bit uneven. And that's going to give it a little bit more visual interest. So I have a few splashes that I've done, just generic bowl splashes. And you can see that there's really not a rule about the shape of water, and this, it's going to be very much determined by the show you're working on. Yeah, and there's no right shape. Like you can, like this one is very pointy, and it's the perspective's not so great. I give myself revisions on this one, just to be fair. But this one's a lot more stylized and bowl-like. And then we have some stuff that's a little bit more like blobby looking.
Yeah, it feels a bit heavier, a bit swampy, not just because of the color.
Yeah,
It's more
it's
viscous.
from a swampy episode. So there's lots of different styles and different shapes you can go with. These are side splashes. So like I said, if your stuff is coming in from the side, you're going to get something probably like this top one if you're working on a show that has volume. But a lot of them in 2D, you get flat, just sideways flat things. Like these in particular, these very drippity ones, those were layered in between things. So you have this layer and then an object and then this layer and an object. So things splashing around, and you can hide the flatness by just having multiple ones that are layered behind each other. And again, you can see the timing of this one. It falls apart a lot. The drips disappear very fast. Yeah. And then this one over here, it has a lot fewer drips and a lot less detail in the shape of it, but it has shading on it. It has highlights on it. So it's got a complexity in a different way. So when you're first starting, like trying to figure out, like panicking over the shape of your bowl is really not a good use of your time.
Oh, okay.
That's good to know. It's, yeah, like whatever it looks like in the end, that's fine. Oh, I've got one here. I had to do a splash cycle, which is an absolute nightmare.
Oh, you gotta figure out how to make it loop somehow.
Yes. Looping splashes is one of the most tedious things you can do. It's a really fun and nightmare challenge. So this one on the left was the first one I did. And then they wanted it to be much more busy because the style of the show wasn't so simple. I thought I could get away with simple because it was kind of smaller, but they wanted it in this more of the detailed style of the show. So this was the first pass, and then this was the second pass.
Whoa.
So I just took this, which was like, I figured out the timing with the simple shapes and the simple blobs. And then I went over and I added like the interior holes of the water breaking up. And I added much, much more splash coming off the top of it, like the details of it. So you can start very simple and then add more and more detail as you go. Even with something like the cycles, it's something that you can do in layers.
Right. Because at first I would have thought that second one was a completely new animation. But yeah, now that you mention it, it is the first one. It's almost like a cleanup pass of the first one.
Yeah, and this side one is the same as this one, but it had to go down. So I took the same one and I just redirected all the water down rather than starting from scratch, because setting up the cycle was so much harder than redrawing all the details.
Got it. Got it.
Right?
Wow.
So just like character animation, you can start with a blocking pass and add detail passes. That's totally doable. Okay, so don't panic about the details. The first thing you want to do is just get that bowl working. And like I said, you can just do a very simple thing like this where you've got some highs and lows. And then you track each one. You can give, this is like A, this is B, this is C, and then D in the back. And then treat them just like you would a bouncing ball. So this little thing here, as it comes up, could follow this very nice arc that you drew for yourself and then abandoned. Right? And that will tell you where your thing is going. And then as it breaks up, you could still follow it with your drips.
Got it.
So the timing is not like super keen on that, but that's one of the ways that I would start figuring out the splash. And I'd even do the bouncing ball. I put a little bouncing ball. So when you're figuring out your timing, just start with a ball. So you're thinking when the water hits, so this is the impact of the actual splash. You don't need to have a ball before that. So here's where my splash impacts, and it goes up and down. So you want to figure out, do I want a really long hang time? Do I want kind of a straight up and straight down? And think about that, because some water hangs really long. And you could say that that ball represents this part of the thing, just the top of your splash. So that's where the ball is going to be. And then you could even take that ball and add like a sideways path on it. So it starts here and then it goes out here.
Right.
Right. So then you can get the arc on it.
I was about to say, would the splash go as high as the ball would have hypothetically bounced? But that's not necessarily the case, because like a super dense ball that, like a bowling ball, probably wouldn't bounce a lot, but it would create a pretty tall splash, right?
Right. So this is just, you use the ball as a visual representation just to show yourself where you want your peaks of your splashes to be.
Oh, okay.
So you could even take this and, you know, so you've got your first ball goes that high, but you don't want this one to go as high, so you can just disrupt the height of it. And you have to like fix your arc because this is all janky now. But once you smooth out that arc, you can say, okay, blob A is going to follow this arc, and then blob B is going to follow this one, and then blob C is going to follow this one. So you could use a ball to figure out all the different trajectories of your different like splash peaks. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's I'm trying to figure out the words for it because it's really exciting. But it is almost like a rough pass in a way. But you're actually like motion tweening it rather than drawing it.
It's giving yourself something to go by, because like I've done, I don't know, umpteen million splashes now, so I can see this in my head. Mm-hmm. But if you're starting out, I mean, even a ball bounce is really hard when you're starting out. You can't see the arc, you can't guess the spacing. You have to do so many and be aware of it until it starts jamming into your head. So this is a wonderful way to kind of give yourself an idea of how fast your water is going up, how far your peaks are going to go. When you're working with effects, perspective is so important. I cannot emphasize enough how important perspective is, because if you have your water is like this and your little character is standing there and doing like, oh, I'm doing character stuff, yay, and your splash is on a different plane, like your splash is doing this, like it doesn't make sense. Like your water has to follow the perspective of the ground plane or it looks wrong. And you might not know why. You're just like, this splash looks jacked up, and it's because the perspective is bad. So perspective is hugely important. This ring thing you had, another great idea that was abandoned immediately. That's
so confronting, because I felt like it was helping me, like I was using it a bit, but I guess...
Yeah, you had so many great ideas, but you were panicking. So you were like picking up a spatula and you were throwing it away. And you were picking up a knife and throwing it away. And you were trying to like chop something up and cook it. But you were like, do I need a spatula? No, it's not going to do everything for me. I'm going to just throw it away. It's like, but you need it for something. Just keep it. No, it's like, what do you... Stop, bring it back.
Okay, so I need to take a deep breath.
Yes. Absolutely. Like, this is supposed to be fun, okay? Yes. So you've got this ring, and you can use the ring along with the ball as a reference. So once your impact hits, it's going to create ripples like this. But it's also the splash itself, the bowl of the splash is going to slowly expand. Or not slowly expand. It might quickly expand. It might start quickly and then go out slower. Again, this is another thing where you can use timing as style, because it's something in effects. It doesn't need to be right. It just needs to look cool. It just needs to look like it's right. It doesn't need to be right. All right. So if you look at the ring here of this one, it's slowly going out, and then the ripples as it impacts all go out. Everything is going out all the time. And my splashes don't have those little bloopies in the middle. I know this isn't the best color, but you know that like bloop that comes up? Because there's characters in the splash. There's a character in here going, yay, I just did a thing, right? So my splashes usually have, I'll do the backs on the color art, not this one. I'll do like 2 layers where it's like a front and a back of the splash so that you can jam the character in the middle. That way you don't need to use cutters because I'm lazy. And see, everything is always going outward. Always, always, always. The reason that bloopity bloop comes back up is because when something impacts the water, so here's like an orthographic view of the water, the rock or whatever it is will create a hole in the water like this. And so the water that was in here is being pushed out. That's what causes a splash. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So then once the rock is like gone and away, there's a hole here. And once this is out of the way, this water down here fills in the hole and does that. That's what that is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
So it has nothing to do with the stuff out here. That just goes away. It's doing its thing. It's all its energy is going out here. And then water from underneath fills the hole and comes up in that little bloop. So if you're doing the demo reel splash, then you'd have that there. But in production, I don't think I've ever put one there because there's stuff in there.
There's always something being splashed, yeah.
Yeah, if I ever do it, I'll put it on a separate layer because if you have to put a character in there, because you're always reusing splashes because they take so long.
Okay.
So there you go. There's your bowl. So then you can combine these ideas. So like the shapes aren't bad. If you look at like American cartoons, the splashes are very different than Japanese cartoons. And even within either genre, there are subclasses of water. You saw the different shapes that mine had from like 2 or 3 different shows. So don't worry so much about what it should look like. Worry much more about the mechanics of it and just figuring how to get it right. So I just took yours and adjusted the timing on it. So this is your drawings. I just adjusted the shape and timing a little bit. The right one. This one's just, I'm just playing with the timing.
Yeah, that's... Wow.
And it's already better.
Yeah, that does feel a bit better.
So...
Can you show me the exposure frames?
Zoom in. So yours is just all on 3s.
Yeah.
And then mine, I put a whack of them on 1. So I sped up the beginning by a ton. These are on 2s. And then 3 of them are on 3s. And then back to 2s and 1s. So I just sped it up a lot.
Cool.
Because a lot of it, like the initial splash when it's going up, that's when all of this has the most power. That explosive early days. And it wants to go up until it runs out of juice. And then it falls down. So that's when you can get that hang time because it's the fight between the power of the splash going up and gravity.
Got it.
So that's where the hang time is. There are those 2 fighting forces. And once it starts going down, it cannot go up again. This is something I see all the time. Things start to go down, but they go up a little bit, or they can't go backwards. A lot of beginner splashes, like this little bloop, will start falling and then fall like this. In like a jaggedy line, it can never do that because there's no force to bring it back. All the force is going out. So once this little dude is on his way, he has to keep going in that arc. Every single bloop has to follow the arc.
Oh, okay. Whereas I've got ones they don't move out enough. They like some sort of force is holding it back a little bit.
Yeah. So I would just like each of these like tendrils or whatever you can treat. You can, like, once you get that rough, like, I'd rough in like this. This is my rough. So the next thing I do is I'd say, okay, this guy, letter A, we're going to follow this guy and make sure his arc makes sense. Okay? And you could even just do this part. So this is the tip of this guy. And these dots have to make sense. Maybe I'll do it all on one so we can see what your actual arc looks like. Boop, boop, boop. Same place. Now it's kind of up there. Now it's in the same place.
I see.
Now it's up here.
Okay.
You see how that's not an arc? So it goes up 2.
Now that you mention it, yeah.
Stays for 2 frames. Goes up, stays for 2 frames, and then does that. I'm like, that. You're back to the lightning, and that's not what an arc looks like. So then we can follow this guy all the way down. He just disappears. So this should have come out more to like there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you just take each of these guys, so now we can take this guy. You can follow his arc, should he have one. So there you can see here, here, here. How did he gain energy? So then he's going up here. We're going to the very tip. Like, okay. And then he's going this way. So now he's got like a Christmas tree of an arc. So this is why I was making like the bouncing ball joke, because this is not an arc. This is a tree.
No, it's not an arc.
It's not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so if you have those steep angles, it goes up and it goes down again.
Uh-huh.
And if you have the long angles, it goes up and it goes down again. It can't go like this no matter how hard it tries, because it doesn't have a rocket boots.
But I wanna.
But the good news is what you've got is a perfectly good rough for a splash.
Okay.
Once you fix the timing, you've got a perfectly good rough, right? Because then it's just a matter of wrangling these different pieces. So okay, listen, A, you're going to follow a more reasonable arc. So you could even do one of these things where you say, okay, your actual plan is to follow this arc here. So we've got there, and we'll do a little bit more of an actual arc. And so then you just have your dude actually follow the guide you drew and then abandon immediately. Right?
Don't abandon the arc.
Yeah, the arcs are everything. Arcs, no matter what type of animation you're doing. And then once it hits the ground, you can just have it like create nice ripples that go out and be beautiful.
The ironic part is like, of course I'm aware of this, but somewhere, somewhere during the attempt,
every character animator I've ever met, every one of them who are like the ones that are baffled by effects, they see so much stuff in a splash. And like you said, you kept drawing keys. You kept being like, okay, maybe I'll just draw like a beautiful splash and that'll fix it. And it definitely won't.
Right.
Because trying to in between and plan, so you're saying, okay, here it is. And then it goes out like this, I guess. And then like it's too much work for your brain. Like,
so it's best for effects like this to always be straight ahead?
I only do straight ahead. For water, for especially, like if you want to take this and translate it into a cycle, there's absolutely no way you could do that. But you could also animate holes. People think you can only animate things like add.
Yeah.
You can also erase. When you see those holes in a splash, so this one has a hole. So that's animating the opposite, right?
Just, adding in negative space using the eraser.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
When you're doing these like multiple layer things, I haven't been using 20 at work. I've been using a different version. So all my stuff is all shagged up. So you've got, why aren't you on top? Does this have Z? Okay. So these guys are another thing. So earlier we were talking about following A, following B, and following C, right? And this is D back here. But these guys also exist. And again, it's just another peak, and then you have valleys. So when you're first starting, really just focus on getting those peaks and making sure that as they come out, you get your arcs. Next thing you want to start looking at is your valleys, because valleys can lose momentum at a different pace than your peaks. So here, this is slowing out and falling down, while this is still going up. And this guy's going to get higher, while this guy's starting to fall down. So you can see that the distance between here to here changes.
Yeah.
And you can see there's some wobbly bits because this is on TV time. You don't have that feature time to polish everything. But you just follow each one to its natural arc and build those holes in once you're done. Don't build them in at the time, add them in after. So I did like this kind of shape, and then I build in these holes after.
Cool.
This guy here is added in after. Oh, he disappeared. You can't even tell from far away.
Yeah, that's
revision.
This is all such brilliant advice, because like once you've heard it seems so obvious.
Well, this is, so many things I've picked up from people throughout the years, and just time practicing things myself, and like there's so much stuff you don't even know you don't know until you know it.
I'm so glad we did this before I went out and did real life studies, because like I would have just been doing the same thing that I did last time, but now I'm doing live action instead of another animation as reference. But by utilizing these techniques in conjunction with that, I'm feeling so much more confident. It'll probably make for a less dramatic video when it's all done, but
no, it'll be dramatic because it'll be like the Rocky music, and you can just draw you sweating and like doing studies by the river or whatever. Yeah, and then at the end you'll have a beautiful splash. It'll be wonderful.
I love learning in montage sequences. Saves a lot of time when you can do something in a montage.
Yeah, but it's like taking like that organic drawing from that book has helped me immensely in every aspect of drawing. Just drawing things like organic perspective. If you're interested in effects, the very best thing you could do is like draw your splash, but then think about the perspective of the water. Like actually draw wireframes over everything, right? Because a lot of people, when they draw smoke, they do this. But when you're animating smoke, you should be thinking of spheres.
Yeah, like how smoke was done in like early 3D games and stuff.
Yeah, like because when you're animating this, what are you animating? Like shapes. But when you're animating a sphere, you can have this sphere go in a direction and get smaller and smaller, or break up, into pieces as it's going out. But you can follow a piece. You're not following the whole. And that's one of the biggest things about effects, is being able to see, like, take little pieces of what you're doing, but at the end they all have to have a harmonious timing.
That's so
you
funny.
have to follow the pieces, but also make sure that they belong to the entirety of whatever you're doing.
It's almost like I'm stepping backwards in a way, because like in recent years I had been trying to animate smoke as one mass, but at the very, very beginning, just as a Flash hobbyist, when I was super into symbols and motion tweens, I did do smoke as spheres. I'd just animate one blob of smoke on like a wavy path or whatever that would shrink over time, duplicate that symbol a crap ton, overlay it, and they'd all just be in different spots with slightly different timing, and that would create the smoke effect. And you're pretty much demonstrating that technique, but done by hand, which would of course look a lot more professional. That's so weird.
Think of it as a piece.
Yeah. How could I have forgotten the methods that I was doing as a 15-year-old? Like it's like I abandoned them because they looked kind of amateur, but like the thought process was correct all along.
That's the thing about art, though, because like if you have the luxury of going to art school, I went to an animation school and it had a big foundation in traditional art. So I was super lucky that way. But you go to perspective class and you learn perspective. And then you go to like life drawing, you draw humans. And then you go to, painting class and you paint. But it's not until you can take all of those things and combine them that you really start seeing results. So it feels like you're learning separate things, but they're all connected. And when I really started getting solid figure drawing after I decided I needed to draw cars better.
Yeah.
Because I was awful at cars. I could not draw a car. And sometimes you got to. Sometimes they're like, can you just draw a flying car, please? And I'm like, sure, let me just slap wings on a Buick. Like, what? That happened to me. So I was like, okay, I need to draw cars. So I was like, I'm going to draw 50 cars. And then I did that, and it sucked, but I was better at them. And then when I went back to figure drawing, I was like, this is so much easier. Why? But it's all curved lines in space. It's organic perspective, right? So by putting away the characters, which I love to draw, and forcing myself to draw cars, I improved my perspective enough that when I went back to figure drawing, it was easier. It was baffling. So this one, like this shape, this is fairly simple. Doesn't have a lot of stuff. Start with something like that and just practice with your arcs. Practice keeping that bowl falling in perspective and looking like it's staying on the same plane, keeping your circles radiating out at nice intervals, And then you can start worrying about details and style and stuff like that. And speed, just ignore speed altogether. Speed is just something that happens when you know all the hotkeys, when you know the perspective, when you've drawn this stuff so many times that you don't need to think about the next step. The next step's already there.
That's a really cool take. I think I needed to hear that as well.
Yeah.
Especially when trying to animate live, it's like, oh, I've got to keep everything fast paced, otherwise it will cease to be entertaining, which is probably not true.
Yeah, well, that was a tip from that in-betweening teacher.
Yeah.
She said, if you, like I said, she got right down to the taper, the thickness, the length of every taper of every line. And she's like, if you really focus and get it right every single time, you will get faster just because you're better at it. And I've found that to be true with absolutely everything.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think that we covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah, this was incredibly educational. I think very valuable for a lot of people to hear.
It was fun.
I know my personal objective from here is to take all of this and do a couple more practices privately, and then maybe like a month or two, we'll get together again and see if I've improved at all.
I'm sure you will. Just don't forget about your arcs. Don't abandon your arcs.
I won't abandon my arcs. That's the lesson of the day.
And name your layers for the love of all that is holy.
I've filled a page of notes. So if anyone else wants to write some of these down as well, I'll quickly read them out. Remember the ball. Practice bouncing the ball on different materials and densities. So like bowling ball, ping pong ball, golf ball, blah, blah, blah. What would it be like on carpet, on a tiled floor, on concrete, on goo, and of course, falling into water? Perspective is important, yo. Yeah, what direction would everything go in? I think people wanted to maybe know a little bit more about this perspective, but you did cover that in the end. Don't abandon the arc is probably the most important thing. I'll say it again. Don't abandon the arcs. Straight ahead is key, more so than frame by frame. And as far as features go, like focusing on one part at a time rather than the entire mass of the effect seems to be a way to alleviate a lot of stress.
Yeah, what I would do with a splash in particular, I do a layered approach. So I'll do my simple form first and pick like my high peaks and my low peaks and make sure those are working well. And then I will, and I'll do like the simple break apart, like the biggest pieces breaking apart. And then I'll go back once that's finished. I'll save a new version and I'll add in holes or second layers. Like when you have that foam layer, I add that next and then do more break apart and add more and more details. So those splashes I had with very lots and lots of splashes coming off, I just go back to the beginning and draw another splash. I do one drip at a time, just add a drip all the way to the end, go back, add a drip all the way to the end, go back, and do that over and over again until it was filled out very, very, like with just so many little drips, because that's what the client wanted for that project.
Yep. Okay.
And at any time, if you're like, I don't have enough time to do more, then it's done, right? Because if you're starting with a very elaborate splash and trying to get all these details in and you run out of time, you have nothing finished. But if you start very simple and add more and more and more, then you have something finished at any point once you get your basic splash done.
That's actually fantastic advice. And when roughing is very, or rather doing cleanup on the first frame, it's very easy to get carried away without thinking that every stroke you make is a commitment to follow through however many times. And if it's possible to just focus on just one part, building it up slowly, that's...
I like to start, like I said, with big, like say like 3 major like pieces coming, like those like triangle bits popping out. And then you can break that down into smaller pieces and smaller pieces if you need more detailed water. Because once you have something simple, you can draw over it with more detailed, more stylized stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But getting that big bowl shape and that timing down first, you really want to focus on that before you muck about with getting the details down.
Cool.
Oh, if anyone does anything, I love seeing it. You can tag me.
Yeah, please do. Twitter is probably the best place to get in touch with either of us. That's just at Stylus Rumble, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Stylus Rumble everywhere.
And the link to my Twitter is in the description as well. So I guess if anyone practices with any effects as well, especially if they used any of the techniques discussed today, please show us. I'm likely going to edit today's stream down to something a bit more digestible. When I get around to that, I will most certainly feature any submissions that come through. One of the great things about being, small YouTube channels is that everybody can be heard. I wouldn't have to pick through hundreds of submissions for a few favorites. Like basically everyone who submits a thing can be featured. I encourage anyone to get involved. All right. So thanks again for coming by. This was
it was super fun.
Unbelievably beneficial, I think. I can't wait to try these again. Effects is something I've always loved, but I've always felt intimidated by. And man.
Just effects are supposed to be messy. Just get in there and do some silly stuff and have a lot of fun. And worst case, just do dust and blur a lot.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again. Goodbye to everyone watching. I will see you again soon. Bye.